So I'm going to put this together for you so that you can see how I use or teach the Myers-Briggs material, whether it's a one-on-one coaching session or in a group. I'm going to share my screen and then kind of just walk you through it. It's going to be pretty informal. This is just for internal use. But hopefully it will help you kind of understand what we're trying to accomplish or what I'm trying to accomplish when I do it. You certainly do it any way you want, obviously, but so I start with this material, the leadership, personality, decision making. And when they come on the screen or if I'm in a group, I start with this material looking just like this. And I talked to them a little bit that the assessment that they took was for the purpose of helping them, help us identify a number of different things, one of which was their preference for how they gather data. So I really stress this word. Preferences are like right, left-handed type things, or how you want to proceed with different things in your life. One of the things that we're measuring is data gathering and giving out. This probably should say how we prefer to give and gather data using our perception. And we'll come back to that word later. I like to tell them that the assessment they took with Myers-Briggs was a forced choice survey. So it's A, B, A, B, A, B. And there's some people in the room that would really love the A, B, and there's other people who get really frustrated with it. But in this particular category, they were asking them to choose between, oh, sorry, that shouldn't popped up like that, between A, B, meaning sensor versus intuitive. So I asked them just to tell me a little bit what they mean, what they think those things mean, and kind of get their perception about it. And then I simply go through and talk to them a little bit about each one of these words, and I just roll it up and let them go through. I tend to talk about each one of these, not each one, but back and forth, like specific versus general, or examine the components. I'll say like examining components of information is like what, when, where, how, who. Examining meaning is like why. And so sensors are very impatient with an email that comes with just concepts. Intuitives are very impatient with details full of an email full of details. So I ask them if they had to score themselves, what would it look like? And then I get their feedback if they think they would have preferred a sensor over intuitive or intuitive over sensor. Sometimes I will start this whole session by having them identify or sign their name, how they sign a legal document. And then I'll say, okay, now sign your name like you sign a legal document, but use your opposite hand. And normally it takes about 5 seconds for them to sign the first time, and it takes about a minute and a half for everybody to compare notes. And the funny thing is, when they sign the first time, they don't compare notes with each other. But when they sign the second time, they'll start showing each other how they wrote. And the takeaway there is that if you prefer one of these, and I ask you to work in the other area, your performance goes down, your quality of performance, as well as how long it takes you. So that's what I'm trying to do in this first part. Again, I'm doing this rather quickly, but I think you get the point. Again, I want to stress that I tell them that you like both these, but you prefer one over the other. Then what happens is we'll move to this category and do the exact same thing. That not only do you gather data, but you have a preference for how to make decisions. Some people don't like the word judgment, so I kind of talk about the etymology of that word. And when you make a decision, you are making a just judgment. Prejudice, prejudgment, is based on making a decision before you have data. And so this is a very hard word for people to grasp. So again, I show them these two and ask them what they think is the difference between. The interesting thing here is you almost always will get up, someone will say thinking is rational and feeling is emotional. So I like to have that come out of someone so I can kind of start giving them some education. There's only two types of people who are not emotional, and that are dead people and psychopaths. And so we can't just say feelers are emotional and thinkers aren't. What we should say is thinkers are rational and feelers are, relational. And so that's when I start showing this. I like to talk about how feelers will be, they're fair. This isn't fair when something comes up. Thinkers don't say this isn't firm. They'll say this isn't right. And that's usually an indication right there of someone's preference for feeling versus thinking. The keywords here are appear. They're neither warm nor cold, but they appear that way. Very powerful, looking for clarity. Very powerful, always looking for harmony. This, of course, is a great one to highlight and talk about. I like to talk about these two, that they always like to apply all the rules and policies consistently. They like to consider who's involved and what the situation and ancillary subjective behaviors were. I typically say this might be the difference between sympathy and empathy. So again, I have them go through this and identify. If they're at tables, I like to have them try to identify how other people may have identified themselves. One of the things, again, I stress is that we do both these things. One's your right hand, one's your left hand. And then what I do is when I bring these together and talk about these and say, we tend to do these. We have one of these is right-handed, left-handed, right-handed, left-hand. And then I switch the metaphor to say one's in the foreground of your personality and one's in the background. So you have one in the foreground, one in the background, one in the foreground, one in the background. And then that's when I introduce the car imagery and say, think about one of them being in the front seat of your car and one in the back seat, and one in the front seat and one in the back seat. So we've been created to have a data gathering piece in the front seat and a decision-making piece in the front seat. And we have another spare, something we're less comfortable with in the back seat. And the interesting thing is, one of these you publish to the world, one of these you publish to the world, and the other one you do privately for yourself. It's a private function, but we can't call them public and private. Instead, Carl Jung invented these words, extroverted, or used these words, extroverted and introverted, which means public and private. So that's when I start talking about that there's really no true thing about an extrovert or introverted, because you are always extroverting one of these and introverting the other. You're always extroverting one of these and introverting the other. And so I then show them this first portion of these columns, that this is what Carl Jung used to identify extroversion and introversion. However, from gregarious and reflective down is how we have come to think of it, is that more of a verbal way of communicating and thinking, but or operating, but it's really deeper than that if you look at these types of descriptors. And so I have them again identify and share around their table. Sometimes I'll have them stand up and have the extroverts on one side of the room and those who identify introvertedly on the other side, and just talk a little bit about that. But again, I'm just trying to get them to see what the material is and what they're being measured for in Myers-Briggs. So then I go back here and say, so here's what we have now. We know we do both these, but we prefer one over the other, and one we extrovert and one we introvert. And the same thing here. And one of these is in the front seat of your car and one of these, but we don't know which one drives your car. We don't know which one's the more powerful. So we do all four of these in somewhat of a sequential order, but we don't know what order yet. So we have to go a little bit deeper. And that's when I talk to them about the fact that not only do you have two ways you perceive to choose between, and not only do you have two ways to judge to select, you also have a choice in your life of whether or not you prefer data gathering over decision making. So just like these two are dichotomous and these two are dichotomous, these two are dichotomous. And so I like to have them think about that. I remind them before we move to the next portion to say you do perception in one of these two lenses. So I perceive in intuition, my wife perceives in sensing. You do one of these. I do judgment and feeling, and one of my best friends does judgment and thinking. So these are the two decisions we have to make now, which is why we come over here to this area about how you structure your life. And I like to again remind them, you already do judging in either a thinking or a feeling mode, and you already do perceiving during a sensing versus intuitive mode. But we want to see if you prefer one over the other. So I like to just show them this part and ask them just to consider the suffix of each of these words. And I like to talk to them, what do they think ED language sounds like? And what do they think ING language sounds like? Well, the answer to that question is down here below. ED language is very much like this, structured and scheduled and rigid, and it's a built-in clock. ING language is much more tentative and spontaneous and flexible. They like many solutions. So just as I did before, I have them consider this and then go through and kind of identify which one they think they prefer, one over the other, realizing they do both through these other lenses. So then I show them the whole entire document and ask them to write down on a piece of paper which one of these two they prefer. And that becomes their 4-letter group that we're about to look to. And so that's how I do that session. When I switched then from here, I switched to their indicator, their interpretive report, or whichever one you're using, a skills one. And I just walked them through it. So one of the things I do is show them the second page, and then I ask them, I kind of type in here what they thought, what they identified from that last exercise. And then in my interview notes, I had this person as an ESFJ. She scored herself as an ISFJ. I can explain what I mean by note her dots later. I do put a box around this before they get the report and show them these red boxes indicate what is rewarded by our U.S. business society. These types of people here can tend to lead in any environment, any place. They don't have to have content expertise. They just are kind of the natural born leaders. This is the same, but this group tends to be in finances and military. This group tends to be in engineering and in tech, pretty much any of this column really, but those are the top personalities that we tend to select for U.S. business, not necessarily education, but business. It doesn't mean the rest of these people can't lead. It means that these types of personalities tend to get promoted into leadership because of their content knowledge or their years of experience, those things. They're not necessarily considered by most as the natural born leaders. And you'll see that this whole group of perceivers tends to be left out because they're simply not decisive enough. They're always debating what to do. So that hurts. These two, because of their introversion, tend to they don't initiate, and so that's kind of what happens there. So I don't have them read this page. I just tell them this is about the report, and it tells you a little bit about Isabella Myers and Catherine Briggs. Then I go to this page. This is the same page as that tells them everything we just did here, so I don't have to go over it. I do like them to understand that our U.S. society tends to value these four personality dichotomies. Other cultures like ENFP are valued in the Latin American culture, much more so than in our U.S. culture. So culture does play a difference, but these four are very popular, which again goes back to this right here, ESTJ, ESFJ, ENFJ. It all kind of fits into that category. I tend to skip this page while I'm working right away in this one, and I go here. And again, these annotations I've already typically drawn on their report, or I have Robin do it because I don't like to know their type before I start. But this report is mainly only really focused on these four middle ones. That's how the profile is written, is where they score on these. This is what makes Myers-Briggs a little disingenuous. This is their clarity report, which means it's telling them how accurate or clear this report is. And the problem is they put it on page 6, which they've already read the report, so they really don't care how clear it is. They've got some confirmation bias now. But I like to point out that if you score in the middle on this report, page 4 with their profile is not going to be that accurate when you score in the middle. It's kind of a good news, bad news with this. If you score in the middle, in the moderate and slight category, the good news is you've answered almost as many questions as favor the one archetype as the other. So that's good, because you, in leadership, you should be able to relate to people who demonstrate the opposite archetype of you. So the difficulty is you're not definitive, and our country tends to not want their to categorize, but they like to categorize and define their leaders. So they like definitive leaders. If you score out at the edge, that means this report is going to be pretty accurate, because that's how it was written. It was written as though you scored out at the edge with everything. And the good news is you're very definitive if you're in the clear, very clear category. And our country likes that. Of course, the shadowy side of that is you may not be able to relate to someone on the other side because you didn't answer very many questions in favor of that. So this is a good news, bad news thing. Again, the main focus of these four right here. So then I have them go back here and I have them read their profile, but I don't have them read their last paragraph where it says sometimes life circumstances have not supported their type. I have them cover that up. And then if I'm on the screen, I just show them only this part and have them read it. An assignment that I give them later that you'll see in the material that I'm going to hand out to you later this summer has them actually go through and compare this to their job description, compare this to their workflow, compare this to other things that they're doing. But I like to have them just read it while I'm on screen with them and talk to them, and we have an interaction about it. And then before we go to the last paragraph, we go to this page instead. Again, these annotations are already here because I've already drawn them up. But so I tell them this is their car, this is the foreground of their personality, and this is the background. This is the front seat, this is the back seat. It says sensing in the inner world. And for the life of me, I don't know why they just don't say use introvertedly. So I give them this little code. They are S little I. Feeling in the outer world, or in other words, extroverted. So feeling extroverted. And this is thinking introverted because it's the opposite. They've switched now. They've been saying this is either world. And to be honest, I don't know why they're doing that. So I'm staying with the opposite because that was Jung's theory. And then intuition, again, in the outer world. So if you I this one, you E this one. If you E this one, you I that one. That's how Jung's theory went. The percentages are, if based on someone who scores out at the very edges, this is what the percentages would be, 55 to 60. And she didn't score out the edge, so I changed it. But if she scored out at the edge, it'd be 15 to 25. This would be 10 to 15, and this one's 5 to 10. Because I'm thinking and feeling, she scored more in the middle. I balanced that just a little bit. And again, these were things I learned just when I was certified way years ago, but it's a more balance for her because she scored only in the slight and moderate category. If it's in the clear and very clear category, then I keep the percentages the same, 55 to 60, 15 to 25, 10 to 15, and 5 to 10. So I like to have them identify this and tell them that this is their default decision-making sequence. And this makes a difference with what we're about to do with the Z model. So this is their default decision. They start here, go here, go here, go here. And that's what these arrows are supposedly for. And the key here is that I asked them, what would happen if you couldn't do these two? What if I couldn't let you develop them or grow them or use them? What would that look like for you as a person? And they typically answer correctly that they would have to use these backseat functions with which they're less comfortable with. And I say, that's what I want you to see in this last paragraph. This last paragraph basically is saying if you can't develop and express, or in other words, grow or use your sensing and feeling, your front seat, your front seat, sensing and feeling, if you can't grow and use them, what's going to happen? If they have not developed or grown their sensing, and if they haven't developed their feeling, well, what's going to happen is they're going to have to use these backseat functions, and that's uncomfortable, and therefore you may get these types of responses that you read. This last paragraph was added years ago because the knock on Myers-Briggs is all this stuff up here they already know. This was like to punch them in an eye, but they wrote it in code speak and they don't explain it as it goes to here. And so that's a little bit what these paragraphs are, but most people just look at this stuff and don't really see it. So then I started introducing to them what would happen if you could use all four of these evenly instead of 55, 60, and 10 to 15 or whatever the percentage is. What if you could use all four of these evenly and you used each one 25%? If you could teach yourself how to do that. If you did, we call that the Z model. And that's where I introduced the Z model. You're familiar with it. I don't have to go over that, but I like them to think about the fact that right now, for instance, this person, if you remember, goes sensing, feeling, thinking, intuition. So I talked to them about that they do sensing and then feeling and then thinking and then intuition. I start with feeling and go to intuition and sensing and thinking. So nobody uses the Z model because no one uses both these the same and both these the same. We always prefer one of these over the other and one of these. But what if you could teach your mindset to balance each of those? And that's what I'm trying to talk to them about. That's when we go to this portion and I just show them this material. This is all from the little monikers underneath or for each one of these personalities come from David Keirsey's book, Please Understand Me Too. And I just talked to them a little bit about this form. And then I go back and compare it with the Z model. And I asked them, what would, by the way, the dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior is the same, hang on, sorry, is the same as here. This is their dominant function. This is auxiliary. This is tertiary. It's Latin for 3. And this is inferior. And so when we're in this, I just want them to see the ISFJ starts with sensing, goes to feeling, goes to thinking, goes to intuition. Sensing introverted, feeling extroverted, thinking introverted, and intuition extroverted. So I asked them what would happen if we were going to put a committee together to come up with the criteria for employee of the year. What would that look like? Well, if I put this person, this person, this person, and this person on the committee, what would it look like? And everybody pretty readily actually recognizes that their criteria will be all relational oriented. So I asked them what would happen if we put a thinker and a thinker and a thinker and a thinker in this committee. They all pretty much recognize it'll be very rational based on some criteria based on policy and procedure type thing. So then I asked, what would happen if we put this sensor in the room and the intuitive in the room and the thinker in the room and a feeler in the room? Well, then we would have an SNTF, and that's the Z model. The problem is we don't use this, and we put people in committees without even considering this, and we might have all Fs or all FS. We don't really, like if we have this ST and this ST and just a minute. Yeah, those two STs. Oh, here they are. ST, 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 ST. If we put everybody here versus this for NF, 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 you're going to get different results in the committee. So I try to teach them how to use this. They won't know people's personalities, but they can consider that everybody does all of these things and they prefer things. Just a note here, I probably could have started this way. Last week, Oakland Schools, I actually started without any material, and I simply said, hey, let's suppose there are 4 things that we like to do. We like to gather specific data. We like to use our instincts and our gut. We like to have relationships, and we like to have rational thought. Let's suppose we prefer one of those 4 over the other. We do all 4, but we prefer all 4 of them. I'm going to divide the room up into 4 corners. This is details. This is instinct. This is relational. This is rational corner. I want you to go to the corner that you think you get the most energy of and you prefer. You prefer one over the other 4. Go to one of those. And when they started, they knew nothing about Myers-Briggs. They knew nothing about where we were going. They literally went to their top 1 or 2 or their extroverted function. I can explain that later in a private conversation, but they almost all, I had 14 people, they almost all went to their top one that they ended up scoring because we compared it later. So that's a good way to start a group, just to have them say, okay, we do all four of these. What do you prefer? It's also great if it's a group working together to see what they self-identify and what corner might have a neglect and what corner might have too many, and talk to them about their decision making that they might be lacking on. For instance, in this group that I did in Oakland schools, they were all business officials from the area, and there was a very low representation, you would guess from intuitive. So they basically all went to sensing. So just another way for you to kind of present this. So this material helps them. The colors, by the way, this is temperament theory. Orange, green, gold, and blue. That's temperament theory. They were all broken up, and that's from David Keirsey's material. So hopefully that helps a little bit, and you can kind of see what happens when we're using this. Again, I just tried to break it down really fast to give you a way to kind of think about it, if that works. So kind of let me know if this works for you. All right.